Hey guys, Freaky Finance here. Last week I was at the lake, so I didn't do a video. But the week before we did Zymeworks, and today we're going to do tobacco play. I'm not sure how following an oncology play with a tobacco play is going to play out here. Anyways, pretty interesting company. Why I'm looking at it is the P is under 10 and the dividend yield's 7.25, but it is a tobacco company. Some of the brands you guys might be more familiar with. Most of my viewers are North America, so North America brands. They did acquire Reynolds America Inc. a while back. We'll see that because it shows up in the goodwill on the balance sheet. Anyway, these are some of the brands that they have. I'm not a smoker, so I'm not familiar with any of them at all. Yeah, I thought it was pretty interesting. They got quite a range of products, and more importantly, they're trying to expand into a new product. So one of the things, the nomenclature I have to go through before we go through the numbers, is that management is trying to push these non-combustible categories. They call them the new categories if you go through their 10K, and that's vapor, tobacco heating, and modern oral. These things are all growing year over year for the company and for the industry. And then you have the traditional oral, and then you have the combustible, which is the main source of income. Currently dominate the income statement and the revenue and the cash flow. This is critical currently. One of the things that's very interesting is that we're going to see the volume be decreasing, but the pricing increasing for these products, and it's interesting. So how the actual pie splits out is very combustible heavy, and management is trying to take the cash flow that it's still making from combustible and invest it into the new categories. That's kind of their strategy. And their angle on the ESG side, say, yes, tobacco company has an ESG play, or angle anyway, that they're trying to articulate, is that they're trying to push the combustibles, so you smoke, that's been proven to cause cancer, right, because carcinogens, and they're trying to push it into the new categories. Anyway, you can see new categories, 1.4 billion Great British pounds for the company, but really combustible, it's still 22.8 billion, so it is growing, but it's still very small relative to the current company's combustible portfolio. Again, this is their strategy. They're saying, well, this is where the growth is. Customers are just expanding. So you can see in 2015 they said there's only 33 million customers. Now there's 79 million customers, and they expect this to grow to 123 million customers in the next 4 years. This is true though. This market is growing. The vapor market. I keep seeing vapes everywhere I go, even with younger kids, which is in my mind kind of unfortunate because when I grew up it was very much anti-tobacco, and that was ingrained, especially when I went to high school anyway. So that was back in 2006. So the revenue is also split out very nicely. That's what I wanted. I don't know if you guys remember when I did a May update, and I kind of talked about how I had kind of home bias in my portfolio and I had fairly higher risk. I was looking at ways to generate some income and then also have a more global footprint. And this was a way because it has such a high dividend yield and it is global. It is very much global. Now, it still has quite a bit in the US, but it does have a lot of its operations overseas. This was a very interesting slide for me on page 13 of their annual. And you can see the number of customers in non-combustible is going up. And that's what you want to see in a growing market. Though again, this number is really immaterial currently on the current financials, right? But it is growing. Like that's almost a 30% jump in customers year over year, right? And they just guided that they hit 14.8 million during the half point of this year. Trend has just continued and actually accelerated. So that's exciting to me. Cigarette. So this is the main line on this page. If you take anything away from this, is that cigarette volume by sticks is going down 5% each year. So some people call these cancer sticks. But you can see going from 701 to 668 to 638. You're like, well, that doesn't sound very good at all. No wonder the thing's cheap, right? But the thing is, they're able to pass the price, or they're able to pass the volume decreases into prices because the end customer isn't sensitive to price increases because they're literally addicted to nicotine. Now, it sounds sad when I word it like that, but that's true to me, right? So I can totally understand if you're not the type of person to invest into tobacco companies. I get it, right? My dad, for reference, has been addicted to nicotine since I was probably like, I want to say grade 8 or 7, probably even earlier than that. He smoked and then he switched to those nicotine gum, and he's chewed gum from when I can remember him to now, right? He's never stopped chewing nicotine gum. But anyway, I digress a bit there. But you can see British American Tobacco. I own it. Put the trigger in. Originally I was on the fence between this one and Imperial Brands. I chose this one. It's just more liquid. I think a part of it too is that when I was trying to buy Imperial Brands, it wouldn't let me do it in my registered account. So I was like, okay, I'll just buy British American Tobacco. They're both super cheap and they both have pretty good high dividend yields. And as well for the product category and the power of the pricing, I really don't know between the two of them. You can see the vapor line is growing quite a bit, 52% year over year. That accelerated. And then you had the modern oral, which is also accelerating quite a bit, 62% year over year. These are some pretty high growth numbers in volume. And so you can see what the trend is happening, right? People are stopping smoking cigarettes and they are switching to new products, or new entrants to the market are coming in to try vapor and the new non-combustible products that in the company's eyes are less likely to cause cancer, or I think they articulate as in they don't cause cancer, or they're not proven to cause cancer, right? Whereas the carcinogen traditional cigarettes have been linked to cancer, right? This was a very, actually I'm going to go through the financials first real quick here. I gotta try to speed it up. I am trying to get these under 20 minutes, but it's a challenge. So there's so much information that I want to share. So annual revenues basically flat for the year during COVID. It's not a very smoking and the sins, so like alcohol and tobacco, aren't very sensitive to recessions. They're literally addicted to the product, right? It's a very sticky recurring revenue, but the volume is declining, and we saw that here. But they're able to remember that volume decreased 5%. Total revenue in the combustible line only went down 1%. And you can see the high growth rate in vapor. We kind of saw that in the quantity, but now we're just seeing it in the revenue. And you can see it again, 57% year-over-year revenue increase in modern oral. So overall, pretty interesting. The heated tobacco actually decreased, and that's something interesting to see if that trend continues or not, because that should be a growing one, right? They're actually allocating resources into these three new categories from their existing cash flow machine, that is the combustible cigarettes, the traditional cigarettes. One of the things, and this is the most exciting part to me, is that they pulled a lot of cost out of here. So one of the things when I was like, okay, volume's going down, pricing's going up, how does that look on the margins, right? But you can see the margins improved, and then I was like, okay, that's kind of weird, right? And I can see that they're also able to pull 400 million actual salaries. Line item says the whole thing, so employee benefit costs would be your wages, a lot of overhead as well, right? And I don't know if you guys are familiar, but in Europe, what I've seen from my limited experience in investing in Europe is that there is high cost overhead, and it's hard to get rid of employees. That's kind of what I've been reading, and I think a part of this, they were able to use COVID as a reason to get rid of some employees that they were not able to get rid of anymore. Like, I would never want to be an employer in the developed world in today's day and age. You can see that they were able to pull quite a lot of costs out of there, and when I dug deeper, I did see that 400 million of that decline was from salaries and wages. Now, how much that is permanent should be quite a bit, right? As their main source of revenue is a declining business in volume terms, right? So when I see that, I'm like, okay, that's pretty exciting to me. They are impairing goodwill each year ever since they made that acquisition. I think that's going to continue. Operating expenses did go down, but again, I can't analyze that because they call it other and they don't give any details, so it's like whatever. And the thing is, why is other so high, right? It's the biggest freaking expense on the income statement, right? The other two main ones are only 6.8, and that's your salaries and COGS, and then somehow your other is 7.6. But anyway, operating margin looks fantastic. So you had flat revenue basically, but your operating margin was up 600 million. Your interest expense was actually up, and that was weird because I saw the debt went down. So the balance sheet isn't amazing because it has so much intangibles, but the debt trend is favorable. So they are paying down debt over time, and the reason why the interest expense was higher on lower debt is because they were paying down debt ahead of time. So they incurred a $142 million expense for early repurchase of bonds. So that's one of the reasons why. Well, that is the reason why this is higher. Overall, you can see the operating margin dollars up 600 million. And you can see that pretty much trickle here. Slightly actually more, but very good. And what gets me even more excited is that this company is actually cheaper than it was pre-COVID. So this is the current price in Great British Pounds. Again, this is all in Great British Pounds. That's how it reports. And you can see that the market cap's actually about, 10% cheaper, but you're getting a company that's 10% better. And so I like that. Now, there's a reason why we're getting it cheaper, and we'll talk about the risk you're taking. The main risk that I'm okay taking, obviously, because I have a small position in it that I'll probably add to if it does go down, because I view it as a nice place to park money on a risk-off world if we are headed there for the next couple months or whatever, right? But I digress a bit there. You can see total liabilities to go down 2 billion. So this thing is a cash machine. Here's this free cash flow. You can see that free cash flow. The accounting on this is really nice. It flows really nicely. You can see the CFO is pretty much the increase in operating margin. No magic there. CapEx is low. I don't know how sustainable that is because a lot of companies cut CapEx during COVID. But I mean, you're sitting at almost, well, it's probably more than 10 billion US dollars in free cash flow. And dividends paid are 4.8. So they generate 9.2 billion in free cash flow in the year, and they paid dividend of 4.8 billion. So shareholders, common shareholders, now me, get a decent yield on this thing, right? I kind of talked about that. Yeah, logged in at 7.62 on Friday. Today is June 19th, 2021. So like I said, revenue growth, metric side looked pretty good other than revenue growth. Again, lower volume but higher pricing. They did guide up for 5% in revenue increase in 2021 as of the June update. Well, that's exciting as well. So this revenue trend's increasing, or getting better. Operating margin is down. Oh, sorry, is up. But I don't know how sustainable this is, right? It's interesting because in my mind I'm like, okay, volumes are down, so scale should be negative, but they're literally able to push any volume decreases into higher prices, and so the operating margin actually improved, and then they're able to pull COGS out and able to pull salaries and wages out during COVID. The company looks way better, and I'm like, okay, right? EPS looks way better. The share price is cheaper. The free cash flow is under 7. So across the board on metric side, the rate of change terms, it's just dramatically better, right? And like I said, I get better fundamentals at a better price. The key risk here is the volume decline accelerating, but the company finally not being able to offset with pricing, right? Then you actually are investing into a declining business. Because technically the volume is declining, but they're able to offset it with pricing. And you have to ask yourself how sensitive, how much can they push that really? And they are trying to mitigate this by, because people are dumb, right? Management is trying to take the cash flow they're getting and put some of it to work, reward shareholders currently, and then put some of it to work into the new revenue, so the non-combustible, in their mind, the non-cancerous products. That's their angle. Actually, their word choice was to better align with society. Actually, the ESG girl on the call that I listened to was actually very good. It's a hard line to walk, right, when you're a tobacco company trying to articulate the E and the S and the G in a tobacco company. But she did a good job. I should say the vapor brand is not yet profitable, but the growth rate's very high, so that could change coming up here. But really, the cash and the business is still very much reliant on combustibles, and you saw that up here, right? 22.7 billion of their 25.7 billion is from combustibles, so very much reliant on it currently. Though these line items have started to increase, still not enough, not even close to offset combustibles, right? It's an interesting strategy anyway. Just from a trend perspective, I just wanted to see how stable the earnings are in a declining volume industry, right? Have they been able to push off the volume decreases in the pricing over time? And they seem to have a pretty good formula here, right? They're targeting, it almost looks like their EPS is, they're targeting 3.5. That's pretty much the average here, aside from the outlier, at least over the last 5 years. And that's what I like to see in a dividend play, right? So I get steady earnings and I get a steady dividend. I'm fine with that. And now I'm getting a good price because people are sold it from COVID, even though the company actually improved during COVID because I was able to cut costs that I wasn't able to do in the past, or at least that's what I'm thinking. And now they're up to revenue guidance again, 5% for the 2021 year. And that was as of June, so that's more recent, because originally the guidance was between 3 and 5. So when I jump back, I did want to bring up this slide because I thought it was very interesting. So this is on page 72 of their annual, and because the number took me off, so I was like, okay, tobacco excise and VAT, so the value added tax, together they're at 38 billion, right? And I was like, okay, 38 billion in tax collected. What was the revenue again? So I jump back, right? I go up here and I total it up, and I'm like, okay, that's 25.7 billion. So your total revenue was only 25.7 billion. But your excise tax together was 38, or your tax collected rather, was 38 billion. So it tells you how heavily taxed this is. It's actually more than the revenue generated for the company. They actually collected taxes. So some people think it's like $1 in tax for $1 revenue for the manufacturer of the smokes, but it's actually even more than that. More goes to the government per cigarette than to the company in terms of revenue, which is really crazy, right? And that's, to me, it's kind of a tragedy, because the consumer just gets more screwed. So the person who's actually addicted to a product, and the government just fine tax them for their addiction instead of trying to help them. And I view that as very, very backward thinking. Like, you're penalizing the guy who's addicted. They're literally unresponsive to the price increases because they are addicted. So from a human perspective, this kind of is gross to me. But from a investment perspective, it just proves the point that the consumer is price inelastic. It's not sensitive to price increases. That's all this proves, because they're literally addicted to nicotine. Anyway, I kind of digress here. I saw the number and I had to take a second look. So wow, that's big, right? Because I thought revenue was only 26 billion or 25.7, but they actually collected 38 billion in excise and value-added tax. I was like, wow. Anyway, I thought that was very interesting. So again, one of the reasons why I bought it now, one, it's cheaper, fundamentals improved, and their guidance increased. So that's why I'm in now specifically, is because the guidance increased in June. They actually kept the EPS steady for the year, which is kind of weird when you have a revenue beat. So obviously they're expecting some higher costs to come in. So that's kind of weird to me, right? I never like to see that. Maybe they're being conservative on the EPS side, but Again, I got quite a lot of margin of safety when you're getting under 10 times earnings. But yeah, mid-single digit growth. It's not like it's shrinking like the PE would imply. And they are reducing their debt, and that continues to be the good trend over time because they are such a dominant cash flow machine, right? More than $9 billion a year in Great British pounds. Very interesting. Again, their strategy, they're trying to push people, or that's their angle. They're trying to push people from the cigarettes, which are declining in volume but actually growing in value, which is weird. It's a weird thing by my brain to understand. But they're pushing into the multi-category consumer packaged goods, what they call nicotine and beyond. But really it just means moving from a combustible product that has been linked to cancer to a non-combustible product that has not yet been linked to cancer. And that's the angle. And they do take a pretty strong stance on the nicotine side. I'll show that slide in a second. But again, this is just more of the strategy. They're trying to push people to switch from the traditional smoke to their new categories that are supposedly not as bad for them. I think that's how I'd word it. The company would probably just say it's better for them, right? I would word it as not as bad. That's just my view. But yeah, this category is growing. We saw that in the revenue numbers. And yeah, 43% CAGR. It is growing. I see it a lot in kids, unfortunately. I think my generation, or maybe just me, got lucky with smoking. I remember it wasn't very popular when I was in high school anyway. They do talk about nicotine here. Obviously, this is a tobacco company saying that, really just reporting there's insufficient data to include that nicotine causes or contributes to cancer in humans. That's from the Surgeon General. Basically, nicotine is addiction. That's all it is to me. And that's all I've seen in my life personally from people that smoke. And my father, like I said, it's nicotine's addictive. And again, we saw that. I mean, that's pretty evident in the excise taxes, right? People are addicted. They're not sensitive to the price increases. I thought this slide was interesting, mainly because they are trying to get high single-digit future EPS growth. Currently, they're at mid-single-digit EPS growth. So that would be nice if they can get it, because they have been pulling cost out pretty good, especially during COVID. They are trying to, if they can get $5 billion, I think they're currently only at 1.2 or 1.4. That would be nice as well, right? That's quite a bit of growth. I mean, and $5 billion isn't amazing for the company because, like I said, the combustibles are currently still over 22.5 billion in a year, so it'd still be a fraction of the overall business. But it does show you the growth, right? Because that's technically a 3x by 2023 in terms of revenue. And this one, they want to target 50 million non-combustible customers. I thought that was good too. So you can see currently they're at 13.5. Well, actually, as of mid 2021, they're at 14.8. So they're going to try to target 50. That's their goal. So far, it looks like they're on trend to do that. So that actually accelerated in the first half of 2021. So it appears their investments into the new non-combustible markets are working for them. And again, you can see that here on their comment. He said, yeah, I know we're at 14.9 million. So up from the 13.5 they finished the year at. I already talked about the guidance increase. I am going pretty quick here. Volume recovery. So they talked about this in the emerging markets. They said they're growing share in emerging markets. So Bangladesh, Pakistan, Vietnam. Places where you still see quite a lot of people smoking, especially in the emerging markets. And sometimes excise tax kicks in later. Every country deals with cigarettes and the addiction in a different way. But usually it's just by doing what other countries have done, which is just increasing taxes on them. I thought this was interesting. So maybe one of the reasons why I'm getting it cheaper is that they said that the new categories, they're increasing their investment. So they're saying it will lower their first half operating margin. And that's interesting to say in June because operating, like technically they've seen the full 6 months pretty much of the year. So we're going to get those numbers in mid or late July coming up here. So in about a month anyway. So that'll be interesting to see. Basically, they're saying we are investing more into our new categories, but we're making more in terms of revenue than we thought. So I think that's how they're dealing with the revenue increase. They're just accelerating their investment into new categories, and I actually like that idea. So I think they need to do that over time for this business to be sustainable. Because eventually there will be a point where they won't be able to push the volume decreases onto the customers through higher prices, but I don't know what point that is. You don't know how high, right? No one really knows how high someone is unwilling to walk away from cigarettes. This slide was interesting. So it talks about, hey, your revenue growth increased, but your EPS didn't for your guidance. What's going on? Anyway, his first answer is, first one, we're trying to continue to invest in more new categories. I already said that. They did say the losses from our new categories business will reduce. So they currently are losing money in the new categories, but they're obviously making a killing in the combustible. But they're saying, hey, we reached peak loss in 2020 from these new categories. So they're going to start actually increasing the margin as we go forward and going to keep investing in this. So that's a good thing. And I think that's hidden in the numbers. I did find this interesting on the British American Tobacco to buy nearly 20% stake in the Canada-based cannabis producer, Organigram. It's a New Brunswick company in Canada. I remember doing this one. I think they were one of the first companies to actually get a local provincial government backing from the province of New Brunswick. So I think they called it an MOU. And anyway, it's one of the first ones. It was kind of like the investment thesis was to pick a winner in each province because every provincial entity wanted their own champion for cannabis, basically. So in Alberta, it was Aurora. In Ontario, you had more in Ontario. You had the big one, Canopy, and then in Quebec you had Hexo. It was kind of fun, right? And every single province picked their own little champion. But anyway, British American Tobacco took a 20% stake in this Organigram one. I think this trend's only going to continue. If Americans were to legalize cannabis entirely, make it federally legal, these companies would move real quick. If at today's prices, because they're trying to get out of the combustible cancer-causing products and branch out, right? And this just fits the ticket so well. Not necessarily the actual flower, because again, that's a carcinogen. But if you can get it so it's different form factors, right? So like your beverages and your edibles, even pharmaceuticals, that's a big deal for these guys. And these guys are big, right? So just for context, like I said, cash flow, let's just say it's 9.2 Great British Pounds. So let's just say it's 10 billion American dollars. It's not, it's higher than that, but 10 billion American dollars in 1 year's free cash flow. You could buy almost every single MSO with 1 year's free cash flow for this company. Any MSO is yours 1 year. So I feel like if federal legalization were to happen, there's going to be a lot of action. I digress a bit there. I just thought this was interesting because I think this trend is just going to continue. And I think it's a source of growth for these tobacco plays. And I think a lot of them are looking at it for the reasons that I just showed, right? They are trying to branch out into different products that don't cause cancer. And I think that makes sense. Though I'm not buying it for the cannabis play. I'm buying it for the actual current fundamentals and the current earnings and the current dividend yield. But yeah, it's been having a hell of a time trying to get over 40. Like I said, it sold off during the COVID panic here, though it's been in this range for a while. Okay, there's the COVID panic under 30. It was getting close there, but it rejected it again. And now we're coming back to 40. But you can see at one point this company was actually fairly priced, and then it hasn't really been in this range. So if we just look back to prior time, you can see 2011. And if we were to go through the trend, 2011, how did this company look? I mean, it's a lot smaller. EBITDA is 8.7 billion, so pretty good EBITDA still. But you're only getting 2.5 EPS, right? Right now you're getting 3.5 EPS. Company's about 40% better in terms of earnings per share. And again, about 60% better in EBITDA, but they did dilute the earnings or the shares quite a bit. So that's one of the reasons why the EBITDA growth didn't trickle to hopefully the EPS growth. But you can see the company, let's call it 40% better, but we're getting the same price. So I like that. But yeah, it's a very interesting company. I totally understand if you guys don't invest in the tobacco companies for ethical reasons or anything like that, or just your own prerogative. But for me, at this point, it looked pretty good. So I decided to buy into it. It's another different company. Like I said, I was trying to find some cheaper non-American plays. For context, the SPY S&P 500 ETF is at 27 times earnings. I mean, this company's at 9, so I'm getting literally a 66% cheaper, better yield. There's a reason why. It's because the volume has been declining on cigarettes, and I think no one wants to touch tobacco companies, right? So, but yeah, I view this as, it looks real good to me. And currently, based on all information, it looks like over time should work out. So again, the key risk is how long can they push the volume declines and offset it with higher prices, right? I think it's still a ways away because nicotine is addictive and consumers are not price sensitive to it. Anyway, I'd like to know your thoughts and have a great weekend.